And so just because you can't invest today doesn't mean that you can't do it tomorrow or 2 years or 3 years from now. And really most of the conversations I've had with people who say, I really don't have the means to invest right now, they're probably a lot closer to being able to invest passively than what they actually think or realize.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Ballara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why? Hi everyone, I'm Jason Ballara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today I'm here with Allen Lomax. As an accidental real estate investor, Allen has done fix and flip apartment rentals, spec home development, and mobile home parks. He now focuses on capital raising to empower others to find their financial well-being through passive real estate investing. Allen, I just want to start first by saying thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm excited to get to talk, and I really appreciate you taking the time out this morning.
Well, Jason, it's a real pleasure to be with you, and I thank you for allowing me to be with you today and share my experiences with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with that. Let's start, kind of with your background. Your bio mentions accidental landlord. So tell us a little bit about your background and just give us your story.
Well, I had been interested in real estate for a very long time, but never really took any steps to do anything about that until I was teaching and working at the University of Guam. And I wanted a place to come to here in the States when I was on vacation or whatever. A lot of reasons we came back to the States from Guam, administrative reasons and working with grants and what have you, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area. But I'm originally from Colorado, and I wanted a place in Colorado to kind of nest when I had a chance to get back here in the States. So I purchased a piece of property there and built a house while I was living there in Guam, and I rented that out, and I built it as rather a duplex. The small part that I was just staying in was just for vacation purposes, and rented out the rest of the house. So that was really my first step into real estate investing, though I didn't really think of it an investment per se, but just as a place to land. But discovered that it was kind of nice to have someone else paying the mortgage and still at the same time giving me a place to come to. I held on to that for several years. And even after I returned to the States, I ended up in South Texas, and I started following different real estate investors, and decided to step out into mobile homes. So I purchased a rundown mobile home, renovated it. And actually, I moved from the home that I owned there in Kingsville, Texas, and lived in the mobile home. And then I actually sold my home on a seller contract, and that worked out well. They eventually, after 2 years, got their own financing and did well on that. So I then moved to Western North Carolina, and I purchased a home here in North Carolina, much, much larger than what I needed for myself. And so I did what they call today house hacking, and that's what I intended to do after purchasing it. And so I took a single family home and split it into a triplex. And that was working wonderful. I not only was paying my mortgage, but I had cash flow from that, and so I got that going, and I purchased another single-family home in the area and converted it into a triplex. And so I had 5 rental units without having really any out-of-pocket expenses, and it was working really quite well. I had a decent cash flow, and I also had uh, a pretty decent income as a university administrator. And then 2007 and 8 came along, and the crash hit. Simultaneously, there were a lot of cutbacks in um, the higher education segment, and so I lost my job at the same time that the economy crashed. And though I had cash flow from my 5 different rentals, it wasn't sufficient to maintain my lifestyle. So it was a very devastating time. I was able to hold on to the properties for a significant amount of time. One of them I eventually lost through foreclosure. I was able to hold on to one of the properties, and it continued to provide a little bit of cash flow for me while I was trying to get my life together. Eventually, through that period of time, I actually sold the one property that I had been holding onto, and had access then to a fair amount of capital, which I then put into spec housing, and that was a total and complete disaster. This was in 2016. I lost everything that I had been able to pull together through that 8-year period of time. Lost everything plus, so I ended up in the red and had to start all over in 2016. And 2008 was devastating, but in 2008 I didn't really beat myself up because I didn't cause the economic downturn. That was,
right.
factors way beyond myself. But in 2016, not only was it financially devastating, but I beat myself up really, really bad because I took all the blame for those losses because, well, I didn't know what I was doing, and that's why I call myself an accidental investor. I was just doing all of these things by the seat of my pants, and I was reaching out and getting some education, but not a great deal. And I had absolutely no mentors, really nobody outside of the gurus that I was following, and I didn't really even check out those gurus to know if they really knew what they were talking about. So I take responsibility for that, and that's good. That's positive. The bad part about it is beating yourself up when you do make mistakes. That's just, there's nothing good about that. But I supposedly have this background in psychology, and I'm not supposed to be doing things like that, but I did, and it took me a really long time to work through that and to get over the devastation of that. In 2020, I finally got my act together personally, and I started a podcast, and I started networking and really getting to know the investor community. And eventually I joined actually a couple of masterminds actually, and have started turning things around. And today I work as a capital raiser for a number of different very experienced teams that have the background and the experience and the know-how to not only be successful during the economic good times, but also know how to manage the risk so that they can get through the economic downturns, which are, of course, inevitable. So that's my life, my boring life, and my journey as an accidental real estate investor.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, Alan. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there, because one of the things I think that people that are new to real estate tend to have a sense of maybe that real estate means one specific thing, but it really, like, there's almost like an infinite number of ways that you can get involved. And I mean, you just touched on a whole bunch of them, right? You sort of, I guess that Colorado house was almost like a short-term or mid-term rental type of situation. You did mobile home park, you had seller financing, you had spec homes, now you're raising capital. Like there's so many different ways that you can be involved. And I think a lot of times when people ask me how about getting started, what's the important thing about getting started, I think the important thing is deciding what you want out of it. Like first, do you want to be the active investor? Do you want to be a passive investor? Do is there some way for you to define what you're trying to achieve out of, why do you want to be a real estate investor? And so I think that what you did, the really, I think, big thing there is you took action. You actually did things. You invested in real estate, and you did, you had one event out of your control. But I think when you invest in real estate for more than a few years, it's things are going to happen. There's going to be market downturns, things like that. I would also say you're going to make mistakes, right? Like you're going to maybe try an asset class or a business plan or something like that just probably was, I don't know if sometimes we get a little bit cocky and we think, oh, well, I had success here, I can have success over here too. But I think, the fact that you talked about how that weighed on you and had a hard time, I think it's a little bit, I mean, it's an important piece for people to understand is maybe the gravity of what you're doing when you're actively real estate, like when you're an active real estate investor. And that's whether you're doing it for yourself or taking on investors. There's a lot more at risk there than there is when you're a passive investor. Like when you're a passive investor, worst possible thing that happens is that the investment doesn't go bad and you lose your money. When you're the active investor, the worst possible thing is, you lose your money. You might lose other people's money. You might go bankrupt. You have, mental health issues because of it. Like there's a whole lot that comes with it that I think doesn't get talked about a lot, right? And it's kind of it is an interesting piece. And with your background, you said you shouldn't have had those struggles, I guess, but like I don't know that that's a thing that you necessarily can have control over, because it is a big deal. Like there's a lot of work and time and money that goes into it. And it's like, when things don't go right, it is, I do think it is sometimes really hard to swallow, especially if it's something where you are blaming yourself. I don't know if you would kind of dive in a little bit more on that, because I just think it's an important thing for people to hear about.
Oh. Well, as a counselor psychologist, I deal with people who are going through difficult times and challenges, and and of course have had, the training in the background to understand those situations in non-judgmental ways and means. Well, that's very easy to apply to people I'm working with. It's a very different challenge when that happens to oneself. Even with the years that I had spent as a counselor and teaching psychology and so on and so forth, uh, I after the loss in 2016, I don't know what I guess I would call it a complete breakdown. I mean, I didn't it wasn't a schizophrenic breakdown, but it was a total and complete breakdown in that I just simply could not function, and I I just could not see uh, any way out of it. I was no spring chick. I was in my mid-60s, and I thought that this is the end of the road. This is how it is going to end. And uh, I uh, and I just couldn't function. Uh, I I mean, I could do the day-to-day things. I had horses. I could get up and take care of the horses. I could not give the horses any real attention. I couldn't be involved with them. I just essentially vegetated and did that for a good 2 years. I eventually started reaching out. I mean, I was an adjunct instructor at the time, and I could do the teaching. I could do the things that I just absolutely had to do from day to day, but I could not think creatively. I couldn't get out of the fun. I eventually did, with a friend, started actually riding horses on a regular basis once a week, and that was good therapy. It started bringing me out of those depths, and I found a place where there was some joy and some happiness and fulfillment. But and I think that was one of the ways that I started coming out of it. But I didn't really start coming out of it until I actually started taking action, and you had mentioned that earlier. And the taking action was actually starting the podcast, and that was one of the most difficult and challenging steps. I don't know, one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life was actually starting the podcast. It was terrifying, uh, and and the first many interviews I did were just really pretty much disastrous, and but I learned, got better. I persisted and got better, and then as that continued, my mental health started improving, and I started making a lot of contacts that were meaningful and helpful and beneficial. So anybody can go through it. I mean, uh, I I was, when it first happened, I was really, I quite frankly, I was really suicidal. Um, my daughter, who was not living with me, who was an adult child, uh, but it was just the thing that stopped me from taking action on suicide was simply um, realizing I could not do that to my child. And that was really the only thing that prevented that at that particular time. So, yeah, dark times.
Yeah. And I, I think, well, thank you first for being open about that and sharing it. And I think it's probably something that a lot of people, you know, lot of people that are trying to achieve big things, trying to make, sort of large moves in business, real estate, whatever it is, just in life in general. And then you have something that just kind of smacks you in the face to it, and just doesn't go the way that you planned, and it can do that. It can be really hard to handle, really hard to move on from. And I think one thing is to you had, thankfully, support system. You had your daughter. You found something in riding horses. You took action in starting the podcast. Like you do have to take steps to kind of come back from those sorts of things. Why the podcast? It's interesting to hear you say, you were terrified. I mean, I felt the same way when I started this podcast. My podcast I was like, no chance I was ever going to have a podcast. And it was really kind of just encouragement from some of the people I had met and networked in the real estate space. And they were like, no, you should do it. It's a good thing to have, that kind of thing. And I'm like, I think a large part of the reason I did it was I felt like I wasn't a very good, they were like, oh, you need to do a podcast or a blog or something. I was like, I don't know that I'm a very good writer, so I guess I have to do a podcast. Like it wasn't so much of a, here's this thing I'll do and be, it'll be great. It was like sort of begrudgingly, oh, these folks are encouraging me. What was your kind of motivation when you started your podcast?
Well, I was aware of the fact that networking is critical in the real estate investing industry, and so there's different ways of doing that. You can just call people up and have coffee. I did a little bit of that, and it was extraordinarily awkward, unfulfilling, and virtually unproductive. And I live in a very rural area. There's not other real estate investors close by. So the really closest city of any size is about a 55-minute drive. So it was an expenditure of time, and it just felt really awkward reaching out to people, say, I'd like to, have some coffee with you and just talk about real estate. It was quite awkward. The other thing is, of course, going to meetups and conferences and things like that. That was, and I tried that a little bit too, and it was just fruitless. I just in those kinds of situations, I'm like the fly on the wall. I just am not going to get in there and mix and integrate with people, and so those attempts were just absolute failures and useless endeavors. And so the podcast was my way of networking, and I knew I had fairly decent interview skills, and I had the internet, I had cameras, I had some technical capabilities, and so I just thought, well, let's give this a try, and it worked. It was successful. It's the way I have built my network, and that was the reason, was to build a network.
Yeah, and it I guess also, and we throw in there, there was COVID, so there was a lot less in-person meetings and things like that. So I mean, yeah, similar sentiment on my end. It was just, I guess that's the podcast was when it came to in-person meetings, was a lesser of two evils, because I feel the same. I get very introverted, and I get anxious in like large crowd settings. And so I really, the one thing I was surprised about is I love these conversations. Like I really enjoy that like one-on-one conversation, hearing about people, their background, and what their kind of experiences have been, and just learning about them on a I guess maybe deeper level than you would even at a conference or something like that. It's just, you don't always get to have, this 30, 45-minute conversation where you get to hear all their background. But so you started the podcast, and then you pivoted into capital raising, and I probably could guess some of the reasons why, but what sort of took you down that lane? I think with capital raising, a lot of times that does involve it's just a lot of these conversations, a lot of networking, a lot of kind of interacting with people and trying to find their pain points or what they're looking to accomplish in life. How did you make that transition, and tell me a little bit about your journey into capital raising?
Well, when I joined the mastermind group that I'm a part of, the multifamily mastermind group, my intention was to actually continue on the acquisition route and to take down the overall management of properties. I'm a licensed real estate broker. I've had the experience with my own rentals and with mobile home parks, and had done some third-party property management. So I had a wide array of skills, and my intention was to really put those to work and to really be a part of the acquisition process. And going through that, and I actually did put out some LOIs and worked with a couple of brokers. And it's not that I minded that process, but I realized pretty early on that, like they always, tell us in our mastermind groups and in all the interviews I've ever had with successful investors, that this is a team process. And I realized that that I couldn't do everything, and I also realized I don't want to do everything. And the aspect of capital raising just appealed to me because it's just having conversations on a one-on-one basis, just like we are having here. And I enjoy that process, and I welcome those conversations. And it's just like one person I have reached out to through the LinkedIn connections that we are making. They responded back, "Yes, I'm interested, but at this point in time, I don't have anything to invest in." I am like, that's not a problem. I'd still like to have a conversation. I expect there's ways and means that I can guide you and help you to that point in place where you are able to invest. And so I'd still like to have that conversation. And I've had many of those conversations, and I welcome those conversations, because I'm not into capital raising for the short-term get-rich-quick schemes. I'm in capital raising for the long term, and that's not just for me, but that's the long term for the investors that I'm working with. And so just because you can't invest today doesn't mean that you can't do it tomorrow or 2 years or 3 years from now. And really most of the conversations I've had with people who say, I really don't have the means to invest right now, they're probably a lot closer to being able to invest passively than what they actually think or realize. And just a few conversations can put them on that track to make modifications in their current financial situations, so that they really are able to invest in a much, much shorter period of time than what they probably consider. So the reason I've focused upon capital raising and spending my time there, it's a tremendous amount of marketing. It takes a tremendous amount of time and effort and energy to do that. I can't do everything. So I chose this path because it's fulfilling, and it's a way that I can provide service to people on an immediate basis, much more so than I think any other aspect, from property management to asset management to acquisitions and so on and so forth, all of the things that are involved in multifamily property investing.
Yeah, it's very much. I love what you mentioned there about kind of being a long-term horizon, which I mean, in reality, most real estate investing should be looked at as a long-term horizon anyway. But the capital raising journey is you have to look at it that way, because as you mentioned, many of your people that you're talking to, I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on your network, but a lot of the people you're talking to, this may be the first time they've heard about passive investing, or maybe they've heard of it, but they haven't really thought of it. And so your job is education and sort of providing opportunities. And so you're absolutely right. They might not be ready, that moment, but they're probably in a lot of instances not ready that moment just because they didn't know they should be ready, or they didn't know it was something that they were interested in. And so, as you said, they're probably a lot closer than they actually even think. You have, abilities to make sometimes little tweaks in whether it's your lifestyle or where you're allocating your funds. Sometimes people have, an old retirement account that they can use. Like, there's a lot of different options that they just might not be aware of being able to use. And so, they might not be ready that moment, but they might be ready in 4 months, in 6 months, in a year. And, you continue to provide them, with the education and the opportunities. And then now they know, okay, this is a great option for me. I just need to kind of, make a few small adjustments and be able to participate in them. So I think it's a great way to approach it. And I think in a lot of instances, like if you approach a conversation with a potential investor and it's, you're acting as if you're portraying that you need them, like this is and not just that here's an opportunity, you're probably a lot less likely to have them, want to invest with you. Whereas, hey, look, I'm just trying to give you an opportunity, an option, ways to help improve your financial future. Here's what it's all about. Here's what we're about. And please, let's keep in touch and let us know if there's something that seems appealing to you, I think is the way to approach it. Well, I think that's fantastic. I want to switch gears a little bit, Alan, so I get to ask you the questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is, of course, related to the name of the show, being Know Your Why. But what is your why? And I think it's probably particularly relevant to some of the stories you shared with us. And again, I'm grateful for you being so open. But what is your why? What keeps moving you forward?
Well, we've mentioned the horses, and the name of my company is Untitled Capital, and I noticed after we started the show that we have the mirror image here, so it's the logo is backwards there, but that does say Untitled Capital, and so my why actually relates to that it's quite integrated with that. I have wanted to be involved with horses my entire life, really. And when I was a child, my parents did provide me with a horse. Actually, I'm going to go into that story, how that came about. But anyway, he was an older senior horse, and he had the roughest gait of any horse I have ever ridden. But anyway, so I had that experience. But through my adult years, I always wanted to get back into horses and never did really until I was in my mid 50s. And it was a thrilling, wonderful experience. I ended up with 2 horses of my own, had riding lessons, worked with what people call themselves natural horsemanship trainers, and had a wonderful, wonderful time. And then in the early, I don't know, mid 2000s, I watched the documentary Path of the Horse, and it changed my whole perception of horses, changed my whole perception of the whole equine industry, and started really looking at horses more as a way to build relationships, not just with the horses, but actually to build relationships with others. And through that transformational experience, I have really altered the way that I work with horses and think of horses and think of the whole equine industry. And so my why is actually helping to bring to the world a whole different understanding of what horses are and what they're here for on this earth, and how it is that horses and humans can come together to actually build a better world for all of us. And so for that big why, it is actually developing my own sanctuary retreat center for horses and for people to come together in meaningful and developmental and productive ways.
Amazing. That's amazing. I love that. And just so you know, the logo looks correct from this side. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Not sure why it appears backwards to you. I don't know. Maybe that's a Riverside thing, but yeah, it looks, you can see it just great from here. So, but that is fantastic. I know it's funny. As a veterinarian, as a veterinarian, you tend to either focus on large animal, which generally means horses, or small animal, which means like dogs and cats. And so I'm a small animal veterinarian. I worked with horses in college I worked in the barn. I just, took care of their stalls, took them out to their paddocks and stuff. Like I was really just a, barn help. And I loved it. I don't want to be a vet for horses. It's a totally different perspective of working with them, but I just think they're kind of amazing, just like beautiful animals. I think that they're kind of fascinating to watch, and I know that even then there was a lot of therapeutic work with the horses, and I have a lot of friends that have worked in some of those therapeutic programs with horses and stuff like that. So I think it's obviously something that is very beneficial to the folks to have that connection. I think we joke because I always say my kids aren't going to have horses because it's a expensive hobby, but it's they both love them. They both think they're amazing. So I may lose that battle someday, but when they get a little bit older. Alan, tell us something about yourself that isn't common knowledge, a special skill, a hobby, something let the listeners know you a little better.
Well, just following up on the interest in horses here. This isn't really a special ability because we all have this. We just don't know we have this. And this is in conjunction with working with horses. And I have actually learned this from James French, who is a Brit and lives in the UK. but he has an organization called the Trust Technique, uh, and through his course and lessons and examples, I have really learned to uh, to communicate with horses through a meditative process, through a mindfulness process. Just an example of that, a friend of mine just acquired a new horse who is, she was told he's a quarter horse with some thoroughbred lineage thrown in there. The actuality of it is he's a whole lot more thoroughbred than he is a quarter horse. And so it, so he is an intelligent, extremely intelligent horse, extremely sensitive horse, and extremely high strung. And she was having a lot of difficulties working with him. I've spent two or three sessions now with him, and he is a totally different horse just because of working with mindfulness with this horse. And an example of this is the first time that I worked with him with some mindfulness activities. I finished working with him. She had not been on him prior to those experiences. I had her get on him and just essentially led him around after I had spent probably about 45 minutes in mindfulness. And he was just a wonderful horse. He just is so intelligent. He just picks up on things instantaneously. So we did a little bit of that and then turned him back out into the pasture. And she had said, well, you need to watch it with him. Once you release the halter, he just takes off. And I go, well, that's not particularly unusual for horses. So I didn't anticipate any issues there. I just thought I'll release the halter and he'll run off and no big deal. Well, I released the halter and he reared up and spun around and he kicked out at us and took off at a gallop and ran all across that pasture. And I'm going, wow, I didn't expect that. And so the next, just to be able to work once a week with her, so the next Saturday, that's what I worked on. I worked on him with the in the actual pasture, and I brought him down through mindfulness and released his halter, and he just stood there beside me. And when I began to walk off, he followed me. So that's, I guess, a special ability. It's everyone has that ability. Few people have developed that ability.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had that same experience. Like I said, I worked with the horses and brought them out, and there were two that were born when I was a student, and so I got to kind of raise them for several years. I worked in the barn for several years, and they would go out together, and one day one of them did exactly that. Usually you just unclip them and they kind of turn and walk away. He just, like, I don't know, was frisky that day. I think they had been indoors for a while because of snow or something like that. He just, reared up, spun around, was kicking, and I cleared the fence from a standstill. I just like jumped straight out of the way because he was kicking out and I was right there. But it is. I'm not sure that, I don't know. I don't know that I would believe that I have that ability, but I do. Seeing people that are so good with horses and just that kind of connection, it really is amazing. And because they're just such a large, powerful animal, but like also at the same time, they're just generally very, very gentle. So it's just kind of that, seeing that connection is really, really cool. I think it always fascinates me to see people like yourself that are just that in tune with horses. So very, very cool story.
Well, before you go on, I want to say you do have that ability, and and you work with cats and dogs. Well, this this training I've gone through with horses carries over to my dogs and to my cats, and it works the same way. And I've just seen phenomenal things with my own pets in conjunction with that. Everybody has it. It's just we've never been taught or trained to interact with other species in that way. But it works for all species.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I will say, sometimes I feel like that with dogs. And just, people will joke, why does that dog like you? Like, why do all these dogs like you? Like, because I like them. I don't know. I just, because you're just approaching them, calmly and try to just, I don't know. I think sometimes, of course, coming to the vet is a scary thing with any animal, and it's just, just be their friend for a little bit before you jump into all the medicine stuff, and it's going to go a lot easier. So I think it's a certainly a connection that is there to be had. So I think on their end, for sure, I think animals, they want that connection. So I think I agree with you there.
Just another example. I live in the forest, and so I do a lot of hiking just outside of my house here. And one of my neighbors has part of that trail goes through their property, and so they have one of those invisible fences for their dog, and it goes it encompasses that trail, and so you have to walk through the dog's enclosure there to stay on that trail. Well, they have this dog, and it was a new dog, and it was just barking and threatening, so I couldn't get past there. So I just sat down and I did some mindfulness, about 20 minutes of mindfulness with this dog, and that dog's my best friend now. And every time I go through there, he expects me to, or she expects me to stop and pet. So it works with all species, and it's an ability we all have.
Yeah. It's it's really nice to have that that connection. Is just it's equally beneficial, I think, for them and for us. But Alan, when people hear this and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
The best way is just go to steedtalkercapital.com, and they can there's a link there to get in touch with me through a 15-minute virtual conference. They can reach out to me through my email, which is Allen, ALLEN, at steedtalker.com. So those two ways are probably the best way to get in touch with me.
All right, perfect. We'll put those in the show notes. My last question for you, given your experience and background, what piece of advice would you give to someone who wants to get started in real estate? They hear this, they're inspired by your story. What would you tell them, is a good place to start?
I would start with passive investing. That gets you into a network. It gets you into a team that's experienced and knows what they're doing. And I think that's probably the less riskiest way to do it. It's also the least time-consuming way to do it. And it's fantastically educational. It gives you all of the benefits of investing directly. You have the income, the depreciation, the appreciation, the equity, and the leverage that you would get with if you were investing directly by yourself in a single family. The other piece of that advice is that of the 600 or so individuals that I have interviewed on my podcast, many of them have started in single family investing. That just it's not that much different than purchasing your house, so it's an easy way to step into it and get into it. almost to a T, almost every one of those investors says, I wish I had gone directly to multifamily investing. I would have been much further along than I am today. And I wished I had taken that advice as well. But yes, invest passively with a team that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it really is a great starting point. And it again, there's real estate investing is a very, very broad category, and it's like there's a million different ways. But by investing passively, one, you're essentially getting paid to learn. You can get, you're making money on those investments and learning how that looks from the investor side, and then also like it helps just build that network, right? You're connecting. It's very, one of the things I always think is important to point out, like in terms of the difference between investing in real estate as a passive investor versus like the stock market or something like that, is like you don't get a network by investing in stocks. You don't know anybody that you're like maybe your financial advisor if you happen to work with one and they invest in stocks for you, but like you don't. But if you're investing in real estate, you're going to be able to create a network and connections that will allow you to grow that grow your possibilities, grow the opportunities. So it's just a different way to look at that, and I think that advice is great. And I just want to say, thank you for coming on the show today, Alan. It's been great talking with you, and I thank you for sharing your story. I think there's a ton here that people will get a lot of value and understanding of really what it means to be a real estate investor.
Well, it has been my pleasure and a delight to be with you. It's just been a delight, Jason. Thank you. It's always a delight to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, same here, Alan. Thank you. And folks listening, I know you are going to get a ton of value out of this episode. We'll have Alan's ways to reach Alan in the show notes, but please like, rate, and review the show so we can get more great guests like Alan. And thank you all for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Ballara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?